Now a word about our next speaker. She grew up listening to Purple Code and the Battle of Midway. These bedtime stories influenced her thinking and prepared her for future roles. At the age of 5, she knew that she would work at the National Security Agency. She eventually rose to run NSA's counterterrorism operations mission. She also spent a few years at the American Embassy, helping the British ready for the 2012 Summer Olympics. She returned to NSA headquarters in Maryland, and for 5 years, she ran cyber exploitation missions against, quote, our adversaries to keep the U.S. and her allies safe. Today, she leverages that experience to look at Morgan Stanley's networks, systems, and applications, quote, through the lens of an adversary. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Ms. Rachel Wilson, Managing Director, Morgan Stanley.
Good morning, Qualys Security. It is wonderful to be together with all of you in this amazing space. I know you guys are usually in Vegas. I think it's pretty exciting that you're in Orlando this year. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kick off your conference this morning. Lots going on in the world. We've been talking about this for years, but I would tell you the new cyber threat landscape means we have a lot of ground to cover. Well, as you guys just heard, I'm Rachel Wilson. I run cybersecurity, data protection, fraud prevention for Morgan Stanley's wealth management business. I've been in this job about 6.5 years, and I spent, as you heard, the first 15 years of my career all at the National Security Agency, the NSA. In my 15 years at the NSA, I spent a couple of years running the NSA's counterterrorism operations mission. Think of this in layman's terms as using technical means to get onto the devices used by terrorists all over the world, their smartphones, their tablets, their laptops, all with the goal of listening to their phone calls, reading their emails, geolocating them, and then my favorite part of the job, which we referred to as kinetic remediation. Best part of working the counterterrorism mission. Did that for a couple of years. Pretty stressful job for the ladies in the room. That's when I started coloring my hair. Pretty sure that job took a couple of years off my life. Then, as a bit of a reward, got to spend a couple of years in London managing the cybersecurity for the 2012 Summer Olympics. Now, as you all would expect, every 4 years when the Olympics rolls around, the eyes of the world get laser focused on that city, that country, and that includes the eyes of terrorists and the eyes of hackers. Now, going into London 2012, the British, given their history, for better or worse, very well versed in terrorist plotting. They had the terrorist threats well in hand. And so that's why we took this divide and conquer approach. And the Americans on site, we managed the cyber threats to those Olympics. So built an entire security operations center in the basement of the embassy, instrumented all of the Olympic venues, worried about third-party risk, visiting dignitaries, athletes, all the like. And it's a good thing we were focused, because the cyber threats to those Olympics were acute. We had the Chinese trying to hack into the clocks, the timers at the Olympic venues. We had the Russians trying to get into the databases that housed the Olympic drug testing records. Yes, which makes perfect sense now, made no sense to us at the time. All kinds of miscreants looking to rub some grit in the eyes of those British. I was thrilled to see those games go off without a hitch and to return home to suburban Maryland, where, of course, you all know the NSA is headquartered. They lured me back, folks, with what they knew was my dream job. The opportunity to run the Remote Operations Center at the NSA, the cyber exploitation operations mission for the U.S. government, truly had been my dream, as you heard, largely from the age of 5, but certainly from the day that I started at the NSA, truly a dream job. In this job, I got to travel around the country recruiting the top computer scientists and computer engineers that we could find coming out of American universities. But of course, I only got the really weird ones, right? Because the best, they were getting great offers from great technology companies to make big 6-figure salaries. I was offering them government peanuts in exchange, but I did have one thing that no one else could offer them, and that was the chance to do something that frankly would have been illegal anywhere else. And for a particular ilk of young person, my guess is you know or are one of these people, the opportunity to no longer be beholden to the Computer Fraud and Abuses Act, quite an alluring proposition. So we'd bring these folks in, we'd give them 18 months of highly classified training, and then we would conduct hundreds of operations a day, hacking into the networks of the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, stealing the secrets out of their networks, giving them to our policymakers, our warfighters, all with the goal of keeping the United States and her allies safe. Now, why was this a dream job? Because in this job, I got to work pretty much every technology on the planet, which as a technologist was awesome, right? Think indigenous Iranian firewalls that we would have to have diplomatically pouched in, cracked versions of Windows that you can only find in North Korea, all of these wacky pieces of tech that we would bring in, reverse engineer, find vulnerabilities in them, and then launch those vulnerabilities back against our adversaries. Also a dream job because I got to lead a team of incredibly special and yes, quite weird individuals in doing a mission that for us was truly profound, bringing back what we used to call eye-watering intelligence. So information that was so remarkable that when you thought about the fact that you were going to put it on the president's desk the next morning, brought a little tear to your eye. But not everything about being the quote-unquote queen of the hackers was moonbeams and rainbows, right? There were definitely some challenges in that job. How many of you are now managers? You somehow got sold that great deal, right? Become a manager, and all of a sudden you got problems you never had before. And managing NSA hackers, problems that I don't, fortunately, have in my day job anymore. Top of the list, without a doubt, hygiene. It was bad. These kids were really smart, but not very shower motivated. It got so bad that I actually had to keep shower caddies in my office. Folks would come in the morning, we'd give Joe a little bit of the sniff test. Nope, not ready to interact with humans yet. Send him downstairs, get him cleaned up, then he could come back to work. Not a problem I have at Morgan Stanley now. Other huge problem, gaming addiction. I kid you not, now as the mother of a 17-year-old son, I'm very well versed in the symptoms of gaming addiction. But in this time period, we actually brought a psychologist on staff. We were doing Xbox interventions, PlayStation confiscations. We're getting girlfriends and mothers involved. Because think about it. If you show up late to work, that's a problem. But if you show up late to work at the NSA, I have to send the police to your house. I have to assume that you were on a plane to Moscow because, oh, right, that happened. These are problems, again, that I fortunately no longer have to deal with. So did that, for 15 years, loved it, incredibly proud of the work that the NSA and the intelligence community did to protect us in that era, remain incredibly proud of the work that they do to protect and defend us today, and frankly have never been so proud as these last 2 years. This world has been a crazy place, and these men and women are working around the clock to protect us and our allies. So here we are, yes, they absolutely deserve a round of our applause. So with all of that said, here we are at our Qualys Security Conference, and we've got a lot of ground to cover this morning, so I'm going to keep talking fast. I've become a New Yorker really quickly, so you're going to get all of this on rapid speed. So in this job today, as you heard, my responsibility is to make sure that every system, every network, every application that I field to 15,000 financial advisors around the country and 4 million clients around the world, that all of those systems are as time-tested, battle-hardened, hacker-proofed as possible before we go out and field them to all of our employees and to our clients. Just like you, I spend my day in these cybersecurity trenches, making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our firm and to extend that perimeter of protection to our employees and to our customers and clients that we serve. That's why I was so excited to join you this morning. You really are my tribe. For me, this feels very much like coming home. We've worked with Qualys now for more than a decade. I am a true believer and excited to have an opportunity to share that with all of you today. But of course, when we're thinking about the cyber threat landscape, I want to start this morning by sharing with all of you a little bit of my sources of sleepless nights in this job. 6.5 years in this job, I will tell you I'm not sleeping well. I think we have a lot of things to be worried about. And for me, at the top of my list of sleepless nights for the last 6.5 years, without a doubt, North Korea. Why North Korea? They are, of course, up against staunch international sanctions. They have no domestic economy to speak of, and yet they are trying to fund a wildly expensive missile and nuclear program. How is North Korea doing this? How are they funding their government in 2023? Well, they've essentially made it a major plank of their national strategy that they're going to fund their government by hacking into banks and stealing money. Right? The old adage, why rob banks? It's where the money is. We just never expected to see a nation state take this on as the source of their gross domestic product. But that's exactly what they've done. And what's unfortunate for all of us playing defense is that North Korea has proven to be very effective with their bank hacking strategy. This is in no small part because they've resourced their hacking strategy at a very high level. Estimates now have it at 7,000 people within the North Korean government who have bank hacking as their full-time job, and those ranks just continue to grow. Now, I tell my kids all the time how fortunate they are that they did not grow up in North Korea. My teenage daughter says that having me as a mom feels like living in North Korea, but this is not fair. The reality is that in North Korea, every 11-year-old child is administered an aptitude test. You score best and brightest on that North Korean intelligence exam, and you were immediately on-ramped into the bank hacking program. These kids moved away from their families into dormitories, raised, trained to be hackers from the age of 11. Now, what's also unfortunate for all of us is that North Korea has proven, again, very effective and potent with their hacking strategy. All of you will be familiar with the Bank of Bangladesh heist. North Korea, the Lazarus Group, their advanced persistent threat actor, gets into the central bank of Bangladesh, carts off close to $100 million over a long weekend. What not everyone knows about this particular heist is that the North Koreans were a typographical error away, literally a spelling mistake away, from that being close to $1 billion. These are non-trivial dollar sums they're going after. That is an eighth the reserves of the entire nation of Bangladesh potentially gone over a long weekend. And again, this was not a one-off for the North Koreans. This is their strategy for funding their government, so much so that last year the United Nations published a report supporting the allegations of 27 countries around the world, all of whom are asserting that the North Koreans have come after some aspect of their central bank over the last 3 years to the tune of $3 billion in losses globally. If you're not losing sleep over North Korea because of their stealing money, you should certainly be worried about what they're spending that money on, right into their missile and nuclear program. Now, if I was very worried about that for most of the last 6 years, the last month, my sleepless nights have been dominated by Iran. Now, of course, we've all seen the tragedy in the Middle East. We're watching the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. But we know who's behind Hamas in all of this, behind Hezbollah. Iran is the global state supporter, the sponsor behind these organizations. And Iran has a long track record of two things: using cyber means in a recognition that cyber represents an asymmetric threat, and using their cyber means against many entities in the West, not just military and intelligence targets. If you were to rewind to 2012 to 2014, that time frame, In retaliation for economic sanctions, military action, cyber activities, the Iranians went literally bank to bank to bank on Wall Street, 46 banks over a 2.5-year period, conducting very potent denial of service attacks, again, all in retaliation for these fraught sanctions and tensions with the West. Make no mistake, if things continue to progress, if things continue to escalate in the Middle East, all of us need to be thinking about ourselves potentially through the lens of Iranian cyber actors. The Iranians recognize building an aircraft carrier is a 10-year project. Building a nuclear weapon, thank goodness, has proven to be very challenging. But when push comes to shove, they put 40 guys in the basement of a building in Tehran and manage to wreak havoc through those cyber means. Now, all of that is important, but what I want to emphasize to all of you this morning is what I really see as the sea change in cybersecurity, in the landscape over the last 5 years, and why this conversation as a combined Qualys team is so important to me in 2023. If you went back in time 5 years ago, the vast majority of quote-unquote offensive cyber activity that all of us would have seen on the internet was nation states, right? It was Rachel in her NSA capacity, it was the Russians, the Israelis, the British, the Chinese, all of these countries hacking each other to gather intelligence and to conduct espionage. Now again, those nation-state cyber activities are still going on at scale. And with Russia, Ukraine, they're going on at a greater scale than ever before. But they are now dwarfed by the volume of malicious cyber activity on the internet that is criminal in nature and that is financially motivated. And that means that every single person in this room and all of the companies and entities that you support, all of you need to see yourselves every single day as a potential target for these cyber criminal syndicates. If you have two nickels to rub together, you are a target. These hackers are opportunistic, egalitarian. They are simply doing scans of broad swaths of the internet. They are not targeting you because you're you. They are targeting you because you are vulnerable. And all it takes is one chink in the armor, and then all of a sudden, we find ourselves jammed up. So what does all this mean, this growth of cyber criminal syndicates? Well, the question we often get is, who are these cyber criminals? Now, again, if you went back in time 5 years ago, most of these cyber criminals were moonlighting as hackers. They were hackers for their government by day and then working as hackers for hire nights and weekends. Now, why was this? You think about those North Korean government hackers. They certainly are a well-motivated workforce because we all know the consequences of poor job performance in North Korea. But they are not well compensated. So what was the perk? What was the Benny? Well, essentially, it was that you got to take your cyber toolkit home with you nights and weekends, and you got to use it for your own personal betterment. And we saw this not just in North Korea, but in Russia, China, all across Eastern Europe. Again, hackers that worked for their government by day and then worked as hackers for hire nights and weekends. Now, we still see that, but what's changed in the last 2 years? Well, the growth of artificial intelligence, the availability of very potent cyber tools for sale, for rent on the dark web. All of this has dramatically lowered the barrier to entry to becoming a quite effective criminal hacker. These people are learning in the same way that our kids learn how to do everything. They are watching YouTube videos and then conducting quite effective attacks, even against relatively sophisticated targets. And the way they're doing this is all through an increase in the scope, the scale, the velocity that artificial intelligence enables for them. I want to give you an example of an AI-enabled cyber attack that in my firm we are experiencing pretty much every week these days. This is your classic credential validation attack. Now this one we just experienced, and I got the opportunity to present it to our board of directors last week. It was kind of a surreal experience, but let me tell you what happened. Hackers went out to the dark web and bought 10 million logins and passwords, credential pairs. These credential pairs have nothing to do with me, nothing to do with you. These are the credential pairs from Equifax, LinkedIn, Uber, Yahoo, you name it, Home Depot, Target, all of these companies that have been hacked over the last few years. The hackers go after the database that houses the logins and passwords, dumps them for sale on the dark web, sells them for pennies on the dollar. Why does this new hacker want all of these old logins and passwords from the Uber breach last summer? It's because he knows that we as humans are victims of that particular form of human frailty that causes us to reuse the same password again and again and again. Now, of course, cyber professionals in the room today, none of you are doing this, right? Guys, right, we know that when we're using the same password everywhere, and it gets compromised anywhere, we're then at risk everywhere we've used it. But passwords are a pain, and so the hackers know that we're weak and we're lazy. And so that's their hope, is that maybe the password you were using at Uber is the same one you were using for your bank account. So the hacker is going to take those 10 million logins and passwords, throw them against your bank's front door just to see what sticks. But how long is that going to take this guy to fat finger in all of those logins and passwords? He'd be doing this for the rest of his life. So to speed up the process, inject a little bit of AI and go back to the dark web and rent a botnet. Simply thousands of highly hackable endpoints all over the world. These are your Internet of Things type devices, smart TVs, smart toasters. The attack last week, a herd of smart refrigerators. Now imagine me explaining this to Morgan Stanley's board of directors, that we were, no kidding, under attack by 10,000 refrigerators. They all wanted to know what make and model, was their refrigerator involved? They were asking all the wrong questions. We got them back on track, but this, again, is the world we're living in, where quite easily an unsophisticated, non-technical hacker can rent the tools that they need and, again, simply scan broad swaths of the internet looking, in my case, for authentication gateways to pummel with these credential validation attacks. Now, here we are in 2023, and I want to pivot to the things that I worry about most for all of you and why the conversations over the next few days are going to be so crucially important. We've talked about this rise of cyber criminals, but when I think about 2023, for me, this is the year of the 4 R's: Russia, ransomware, resilience, and my least favorite, I love them, but our regulators, right? If you are in a heavily regulated industry like I am, the expectations for all of us as cybersecurity professionals, for all of you as current and aspiring CISOs, they are raising the bar on us dramatically. So we need to talk about all of these things. Let's start with Russia. Now, I get the question all over the country, Rachel, we've been seeing this war between Russia and Ukraine for almost 2 years. You go back in time 2 years ago, President Biden was tweeting, he was telling all of us, be braced for impact. Putin's potent cyber army is coming after us, and all of us need to be ready. Here we are 2 years later, and what have we seen? Well, what it looks like is a whole lot of nothing, right? But how many of you cyber professionals think that Putin's cyber army is just sitting this one out, that they've been sitting on their hands for the last 2 years? Without a doubt, they have been incredibly active. And I have to tell you, begrudgingly, as a former civil servant and as a patriot, that I am quite impressed with the strategy that the Russians have employed these last 2 years. What they've essentially done is hide in the noise. So if you think, we just discussed how 70% of the malicious cyber activity we see on the internet is criminally motivated, financial in nature. What the Russians have done is, again, hide in that noise and take really a boil the frog approach, gradually ratchet up, obfuscating their nation-state level cyber activities to appear criminal in nature, to avoid attribution and to avoid escalation. They're not going to do another colonial pipeline full frontal slap in the face. because that will invite escalation and retaliation. Instead, they have conducted what is functionally a bloodletting of American industry over the last 2 years, especially in industries that directly impact Ukrainian refugees. Now, I want to give you an example of this kind of attack that we've seen in financial services, but I would invite all of you to think about what this might look like in your sector, in your field. So again, if we went back in time 2 years ago, before the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, who would take a guess? What percentage of the accounts that were being opened at your typical American retail bank every day were fraudulent? Your Bank of America, your Wells Fargo, what percentage of the accounts every day were fraudulent right out of the gate? 2%? It was more like 40%. And isn't that kind of a jaw-dropping number for 2 years ago, right? The idea that your typical American retail bank, 40% of the accounts being opened every day were fraudulent. So what was going on? Well, there are essentially these large human farms in places like Bangladesh, Ghana, Sierra Leone, huge warehouses filled with people sitting next to stacks of stolen identities, simply opening accounts, one at Bank of America in your identity, one at Wells Fargo in your identity, linking those two bank accounts and harvesting the 75 cents that banks send each other when you link an external account. You've all done this, linked your account to some external account and seen those micro ACH deposits go back and forth. Now that 75 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're doing that hundreds of times a day across hundreds of people, there are entire communities in Bangladesh that are being supported by the harvesting of these micro deposits at scale. Now, what does this have to do with Russia? Well, the Russians noticed this. And so if we were at 40% 2 years ago, let's fast forward to January of 2022. And of course, you guys know, just in your space, just like you're doing today, the big banks, we all collaborate when it comes to cybersecurity. So we're all talking about what we're seeing. We get on a call in January, and all of a sudden, the big banks are saying, guys, we're at like 60% now. 60% of the accounts being opened every morning are fraudulent. This is looking weird. Now it's February of 2022. The number is 75%. Now, you might ask the question, why weren't the banks doing anything about this? Well, because the fact is that preventing that new account from being opened would have cost more than the 75 cents they were losing, so they were simply viewing this as a retail shrinkage problem, a cost of doing business. But now that you're at 70% fraud, 75% fraud, all of a sudden that cost of doing business is really starting to ratchet up. Now it's March of 2022. Tanks are rolling across the border into Ukraine. We get on a call on a Saturday morning. I will never forget this. My buddy at PNC calls and says, Rachel, we're at 95% fraud. We basically become a criminal enterprise. This was true across the big American banks. And what was really going on here? Was this criminal in nature? Was this financially motivated? No. What did the banks have to do? Multiple banks took their new account opening flows off of the internet. For 2 weeks, if you wanted to open a bank account at most big American banks, you had to physically walk into a branch. That new account opening flow, not available. And it was only then that we realized what was really going on here. These 2 weeks were the exact same 2 weeks that millions of Ukrainian refugees were trying to move their money to American banks. This was not a criminally motivated financial attack. This was a bona fide denial of service attack against American banks designed to stymie the flight of capital out of Ukraine. Now, even today, almost 2 years later, banks are still at about 70% fraud, and it's hurting that P&L. It's hurting that bottom line, and we're all being forced to think about our cybersecurity spend, our fraud prevention spend, what we're doing to protect ourselves and to protect our industry from what we know is much more deeply seated, much more insidious than it appears at face value. Now, if that weren't bad enough, ransomware, truly the bane of my existence, over the last 2 years. Not so much at Morgan Stanley, but really with all of the customers and clients we support. Ransomware attacks, you used to think of them as being something that small businesses experience. That pop-up that says, I need $500 in iTunes gift cards. Much more sophisticated now, much more enhanced in what they're doing, all now triple extortion scams. These hackers start by getting into your environment. How are they getting in? All the typical means. Certainly your phishing emails, very often your unpatched vulnerabilities. Something that's been weaponized in the wild comes into your environment, all of a sudden you've been breached. The first thing the hacker is going to do is steal whatever you value most. This could be customer data, this could be employee information, this could be proprietary information, models that you rely on. Hacker's going to steal whatever you value most, and then you'll come in on a Monday morning to find that everything is broken, right? Back-end database is corrupted, production environment is down, your computers are not working, your front-end website has been defaced. You are functionally dead in the water this Monday morning. You then receive the first of 3 very spooky phone calls. First phone call, hacker says, happy Monday. You've noticed everything is broken. If you would like your systems restored, if you would like your data decrypted, I'm going to need $500,000 in this cryptocurrency equivalent by 2 o'clock this afternoon. And if it's not there by 2, make it $600,000, right? They'll continue to ratchet up that ransom for as long as you don't pay. Now, maybe you pay, maybe you don't. I can tell you, we never want you to pay a ransom, because what happens when you pay a ransom? You've now told the world that you are someone who is willing to pay a ransom. You're now on that sucker list on the dark web, and those hackers will just keep coming back. All too often, they will come back through the exact same vulnerabilities that you have left exposed. City of Baltimore, near and dear to my heart after all those years of living in Maryland, has now been hacked 6 times through the same exposed vulnerability. They are not apparently a learning organization. $12 million in taxpayer dollars gone to the same actor, same vulnerability 6 times. The definition of insanity, guys, right? We don't want to be in that place, but maybe we pay. Here's the crazy part. You will then have the best customer service experience of your life. These hackers will be on the phone, they're sending you the keys, they're helping you decrypt your data, they're getting your servers up and running. Your systems will never work better than the day after your ransomware attack. You will then get a survey. How was your ransomware experience with us? These guys are deeply reputationally sensitive. Why? Because they want you to come to a conference like this and say, yeah, I got hacked by the Bulgarians. It was delightful. They couldn't have been better. They want you to tell your friends and neighbors you had this great experience. So they're going to be all over you. They think that you're, a great guy, you paid, they helped. They call you back the next day and say, well, it was lovely doing business with you yesterday. While we were in your systems, and I guess we failed to mention this, while we were in your environment, we stole all of your data. And if you don't want us to sell all of your data on the dark web, if you don't want us to sell your data to your closest competitor, we're going to need you to make another payment. Another $500,000 in this cryptocurrency equivalent by 2 o'clock this afternoon. And now we know that you are both able and willing to pay. So if you could get that done, that would be great. Again, maybe you pay, maybe you don't, but the hackers are still not finished, because they've figured out what everyone in this room knows. You don't want a one-time sale, right? You want a continuous revenue model. You want ransomware as a service, whether you know it or not. So the third phone call, they say, hey, it's been great. Your systems are up and running today. We did not sell your data on the dark web today. But if you want to promise that we'll keep your systems up and running in the future, that we won't sell your data on the dark web tomorrow. We're going to need a monthly fee in perpetuity in exchange for that promise, this honor amongst thieves. And in reality, this is actually a mafia-style protection money, because these hackers will also agree, in principle, to help protect you from other Eastern European hacking gangs that want to come in and do the exact same thing. They might even offer to tell you what vulnerability they leveraged to get in. All of a sudden, you're paying them a bug bounty. You certainly didn't think that was the plan going in here. These guys are incredibly entrepreneurial. If they put their minds to the forces of good, I think they'd be very wealthy in their own right. But the reality is that, again, these hackers are opportunistic, simply doing those scans of broad swaths of the internet, looking for entities that have not yet patched, that don't understand their assets, that don't understand their inventory, and that don't understand their risk. I talk to my board of directors about this all the time, that all it takes is one chink in the armor and we're in trouble. But that doesn't mean that perfection is what we're insisting on. Now, we all know the importance of patching in this space. We recognize that when a new patch is released, that is our moment of greatest risk, because that vulnerability, right, for us, 0 day until we heard about it. Now we know, and now the onus is on us as cybersecurity professionals to execute that patch quickly and comprehensively in our environments, knowing that hackers are simultaneously reverse engineering that patch, discovering the underlying vulnerabilities that it mitigates, and working to weaponize those vulnerabilities against us. Our boards now understand the importance of timely patching. They recognize that that patch essentially immunizes us from those vulnerabilities so they cannot be used against us. But getting your board to understand that this means taking a risk-based approach. It doesn't mean 100% in a matter of hours across the board. That's untenable. That's not feasible for many of our business models. But certainly those that are truly potent vulnerabilities, those that are internet-facing and at high risk of exploitation, those that are low-hanging fruit, and frankly, guys, those that have been well-publicized, that's where the reputation factor comes in, right? If you don't have that stuff patched, you are going to be the CISO that takes the bullet for those losses. This, of course, brings us to resilience, which I think is really, really important in 2023. 3 years ago, all my board wanted to talk about was data security. They still want to talk about data security, but even more so now, they want to talk about the resilience of our business processes. They want to understand, Rachel, what are the processes, our key business services that we cannot afford to have go down? Do we truly understand those services that are regulatorily required, that would get us in significant hot water with our overseers, that would be all over CNBC and the Wall Street Journal if they went down? Do we understand those processes? Do we know what applications actually underpin those processes? And have we mapped those to the actual technology systems, infrastructure that support those technologies? 5 years ago, I was incapable of illustrating, drawing that map, and now I can tell you our regulators I would be run out of this place on a rail if I wasn't able to demonstrate that now. That understanding with depth, your assets and the systems and processes they support, is not just an expectation of our boards, but it is an expectation of our customers and increasingly an expectation of our regulators. Now, speaking of our regulators, my fourth R for 2023, I'm sure you all were like me, as shocked to see the SEC indictment of the SolarWinds CISO. Now, we all know as security professionals, right, that we have a very short lifespan as it is. Average CISO in the United States today, about 18 months in the chair before you take a bullet for something going wrong. Now, whether you did something wrong or not, you're going to be the one who takes the bullet. And so what does that mean for all of us? It means we need to be highly cognizant of the risks that we're taking and the risks that other parts of our business are taking on our behalf. Making sure we understand that is crucial. I don't want to be the one signing that indictment. I don't want to be the one going to jail for our cybersecurity failures. We have a lot of work to do, folks, in 2023. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's been a pleasure.